You're slow this morning. There we are. Good morning, YouTube.
Yeah.
Get this stuff posted on social. And there. Cool. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. It is Friday, April the 4th, about 9:15 a.m. Central Time. I am Rob Howe, joined by Scott Dockerman from The Athletic. We gave each other a fist bump yesterday, and that was about it at the Iowa football. That's kind of when you're over at Iowa football trying to get as much content as you can get, you really don't have time to talk to anybody. But how are you?
I'm well, man. It's been this spring is busier this time of year than it ever has been in before. I think I say that every year, but it really does matter now that I'm doing like college basketball at a bigger level and doing that, but then also humongous news in Iowa. And the Iowa women you got to pay attention to, and then there's the draft and the combine. I probably paid less attention to that than I have in years. And it's just something brewing every single day, Rob. But I guess it's better than the alternative. I mean, I don't know that, Mark used to, talk about what was it, the horse latitudes in May and June and stuff. And I just don't see that. And plus, on Monday, house settlement could become official, or well, that's the next court date that could become official that day. So there is a ton going on.
Yeah, I've kind of settled in here now, and you get up and you're like, all right, how much do I want to look at in terms of what's going on in the world? And that usually kind of sets your mood and things like that. But I'm better at having a routine so it doesn't like control my day, and I can go about and do my work. And I think maybe earlier in the year it was harder to get through, but I'm starting to, and not comfortable at all. I don't think anybody can be comfortable right now. If you're, I don't know, I'll turn 58 this summer. Let's just say I'm concerned about my retirement. I was hoping to retire. We'll see what happens, but a lot of stuff going on in the world, and you kind of balance that with your personal life, your family, and things like that. So, and then the sports world has changed so much, as you mentioned, with the house settlement and NIL and all that. So it's just a lot. I don't know if I could have started in this business right now with just kind of the craziness that is associated with it.
you one of the interesting things is that I saw this as it was a slight to journalists, but it's the truth. And this was like a cartoon in the old newspapers back when we were in the 90s. And there was a journalist blindfolded in it, and he had a dart, and it said, "Today I'm an expert in," and he was getting ready to throw it, and it was just like 15, 20 categories or something like that. It's the same thing for us in sports journalism. I mean, we've got to be experts in the sports we cover, I mean, the teams we cover, but also financial matters. You have to be experts now in NIL, all those kinds of health and human services, and all the other aspects, law and legal. You're really turning around. It's not just going out to a game and writing about who wins and who loses. And that's why when the off season comes and people, well, is it going to slow down for you now? And I'm like, it's actually busier for me in the off season. No question that it is during the season. The season is actually slows down for me as opposed to the off season where all the real big news and of course Monday with the house settlement is the biggest of all.
Yeah, and we'll see how that, if it goes through, and then if it does, what type of pushback there will be from a state standpoint, athlete standpoint. You hope for the best here, but it hasn't been a very smooth ride so far. The Chicago Sun-Times, or was it Chicago Tribune? Chicago Tribune and ProPublica had a story this morning on Illinois athletes just not even reporting any of the NIL income, very little of the NIL income. And the administrators in Illinois were like, basically their answer was, well, we tell them to do it, and this is happening all over the country.
Yeah.
just no responsibility or anything like that. That you're a member institution and you put us in this position, but
Yeah.
we told the 18-year-old kid coming out of high school, hey, you got to report that whatever NIL deal you have. All
Mhm.
right, we're clear, we're good.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It still seems kind of messy. Hopefully, we're starting to move towards more regulation,
Yeah.
but we'll see. I'll believe it when we get there. I hate to be cynical.
Yeah, the regulation is always challenging because then you over-regulate it like the NCAA has done for, except for the really important areas. So they're really looking at it like this. Instead, they need to look at it broadly, and they're going to try. And I know this is probably not the area we decided to talk about to begin
No,
with,
but we've
but this
talked
is really
about this a
important.
lot on this
Yeah,
podcast, so people should be
yeah,
used to it.
right. And what is among the many, many tentacles associated with the House settlement is the schools and the NCAA. I'm going to use that phrase for forever now. Schools and the NCAA, because it's not just this monolithic, governmental agency on high that decrees everything. The schools have a say. The schools run it, and in effect, here the schools and the NCAA want to install a clearinghouse where every single NIL deal above $600 needs to be not only reported but approved. And that is so that somebody can't go somewhere and sign 10 basketballs and get $100,000. Good luck with that. That's going to be the next thing struck down. I just don't see it ever coming to fruition, but they're going to try. Now, my fear is all along, and this has been 10 years ago, talking to Zach Bohannon, even before Jordan, Zach
Yeah.
Bohannon and Nigel Hayes and the Wisconsin guys, because I was a proponent then of NIL and everything like that. But my fear has always been underreported NIL catching up with them in a tax situation. Because when you do have an 18, 19-year-old youngster who, and especially those that don't necessarily grow up either with money or a lot of guidance, or their guidance is their AAU coach or their
Yeah.
uncle or whatever, and here's you're getting this money and then you're not reporting it, and then all of a sudden here comes the tax man, and you don't want to get in trouble for that, and that's where the schools have to be diligent about it. But obviously, at Illinois, they're still operating under 1980s back
Yeah,
then.
Wild West. Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
just kidding. No, I mean, but yeah, but this is what's supposed to happen coming up, is that all this will be much more enforced. Will it? I don't know, man. I'm not predicting anything with this market because it's just everything changes in 6 months. Remember when we got NIL and we thought,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden we never even heard the term collective before, and now that is the most important term when it comes to NIL. So we'll see what happens going forward.
Yeah, and just to kind of, get you guys that maybe don't have a handle on this or don't follow it as closely. As Scott said, the NCAA is basically the commissioner of the sport, the member institutions. They do what the member institutions want. They are, pick a commissioner you want in a major sports league. And then on top of that, it seems like there's people thinking there's going to be relief if this House settlement goes through, and then the universities have some control over the money, but everybody's going to get roughly the same amount, and you got to figure out how to use that. Oh, yeah. And on top of that, as Scott said, the collectives are still going to be a huge factor. So some things will change, but you're still going to have to kick in a lot of money, Joe fan, to make sure your teams win.
If there's a good part of this, it's that you will be at the Big Ten level. And I can't speak to the Big 12 because that's going to be a different. I haven't really talked to them very much about it, but at a Big Ten level, they're still going to be kind of at a ground floor. That everybody's going to have the 20.5 million to spend on their athletes. Football is going to have 14 million, let's say. Basketball is going to have 2 to 3. Men's basketball have 2 to 3 million. Women's basketball at Iowa will be higher than most schools. Volleyball will be higher at Nebraska and Wisconsin. It's that part's going to really be interesting to me to watch. But when you're going to go get a quarterback who has a pedigree like Mark Gronowski, or you want to go out and get the best, a Josh Dix who isn't at Iowa, you're going to have to kick in on the side. And side arrangements are going to be the deal breaker for a lot of great players. Now, most players, you'll be able to get 90% of the guys you normally recruit, you're going to continue to recruit in all those sports. But then the ones on this side, and then, there's the sports that I fear. The ones that I think, if there's one byproduct that I can see this coming like a avalanche, is schools are going to have to Sophie's choice this.
Yep.
They're going to have to decide which ones are we going to compete at a high level, at the league level, a championship level, and which ones are we just throwing on the uniform that says "Go Hawks."
Yeah.
Let's take volleyball and women's basketball, for instance. Iowa is committed to being a high level women's basketball program. They're recruiting in the top, almost every player is a top 100 player that they get in. When they're in the portal, they're going after, Lucy Olson. Volleyball, they're a bottom feeder in the Big Ten already. But then you look, 3 hours northeast at Wisconsin, volleyball, it made, 1.6 million in ticket sales. It perennially gets deep into the NCAA tournament. It is an important sport, and they make money there. They generate revenue, I should say. They don't make. That's an important sport for them, but they've also lost 31 straight times to Iowa in women's basketball. So when you're going there, it's like, if you're at Iowa and you've got, well, we're going to feed women's basketball and we're going to participate in volleyball and hope for the best. Likewise, with Wisconsin, they're going to say, or Nebraska too, which will be a little different, but specifically with Wisconsin, because I think they're more alike like Iowa. Volleyball, we're going to compete at the highest level and try to win a national title or get to a Final Four. Basketball, well, we just got to field a team. But then the worst part, and this is the one that scares me the most, is men's sports. Because they already have to boost about 20 scholarships on the women's side, because now when you cut the head counts down.
You say, is that universal or at Iowa? I know Iowa's behind.
Iowa for sure, but everybody's going to have to deal with this, because nobody was truly in Title IX compliance. No. Everybody tried, but they didn't. In this case, Iowa is cutting about 100 athletes, but roughly 25 from football, because the head count has to be 105, and they were at about 130. I think right now they're about 107, going into the fall, and we've seen a couple departures already. But then, like women, they would boost the hell out of rowing, for a head count perspective. Well, now you've got to adjust it with a scholarship perspective to go along with it. And so they got to add like 20 more scholarships to that, to soccer, to field hockey, and all these other sports, to even it out. Well, when you're doing that, that's a lot of money you're spending, Rob. Scholarship in state is 23,000, 25,000. I could look it up, but for tuition and cost and full scholarship. But out of state, you're looking at between 40 and 45,000, and you're adding 20 on that. That's a lot of money. So what they're going to eventually do is, when this whole thing gets so thick, and because 20.5 is not an annual number, the next year it's going to be like 21.2, and then it's going to be 23. It's just going to happen that way. So they're going to have to look somewhere and say, we're going to have to make some adjustments. And men's sports are where the adjustments have to be made. And when you look at Iowa, I mean, where do you're not, like, all these other schools will probably say wrestling is the one where we don't scholarship, or very little scholarships, or we cut entirely. Iowa's not going to do that because it's too important. But baseball is one where you could see some, or track, but you're going to have to make some choices there. And I would say, like, Minnesota's in the same boat. Do you look at baseball and you go, man, we can't even, we're unpredictable if we can play until at least May. And in this season, we're just not good. Michigan State, you got hockey too, and you're already losing money. So Northwestern, so I wonder, and I fear that either it's going to get to the point where baseball becomes a borderline club sport, or eliminated altogether. Not next year, but 5 years down the road. I mean, that's not my fear, Rob.
No, that's fair too, because it's a warm weather sport.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. And it's, the northern schools have battled against that, and it's not going to get any better because the SEC schools will just, now that they can buy players, they're just going to take the best
Yeah.
players from the Big Ten, and they've started doing that already. So that won't change. And, you know, no more men's gymnastics, no more men's swimming, no more men's tennis at Iowa. You can't, you're getting down now to the bare minimum.
Yeah. Right. I mean, golf to me is one that they'll keep. That one is, you have a golf course, you have a great
Yeah.
golf. It's not that expensive as it is, but when you start to look, football is untouchable, men's basketball is untouchable, wrestling at Iowa is untouchable, golf makes sense. Then you start to go, all right, well, there's the track and field, and then there's baseball, and then that's about it. And Iowa is above the minimum. 6 sports above the minimum, and so how do you adjust? And then that's where you're going to have to. Now, that doesn't mean they will, but that's where these things don't happen magically. It's not like, oh my God, you're surprised out of nowhere that financially things have to happen. And the Big Ten is battled this. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was just laughing about
Yeah.
the parallels to what's going on in the world
Oh, yeah.
financially. A lot
Yeah.
of parallels with sports and
Yeah.
real
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. That's another,
Sorry.
that's another interesting, but,
I'm
but
just
I do.
dipping my toe in the water today. I'm not going to
Yeah.
go all the way in.
Yeah. I got you. Yeah. Well, I could make some puns, but I'm just going to choose not to on this. But you look at baseball, and the Big Ten is wanted forever and has pushed forever and lost every single time to let's push back the start of the season and let's get it into the summer. I do think there is an opportunity there on this one, and that is with Major League cutting that bottom tier of minor league teams, that now college baseball has the potential to fill that vacuum and say, and then you can start your season whenever you want to, but the season's going to extend till the end of July instead of early July. If that could happen to where, all right, if you're LSU and you're Florida and you're Arizona and you want to start playing February 1st, go ahead. If you're Iowa and Minnesota and Michigan State, you want to start March 2nd, go ahead. But the season's not going to end until the regular season won't end until 4th of July, let's say. Then things can change radically because then you're not pressurized to have this really tight window to play all your games. You would have the month of, you'd have the back half of May plus the full month of June to play all of your season. And then baseball can make money. I mean, not generate revenue, I guess, because they're not making money. They're losing money. They're always going to lose money, but
Lose less money.
lose less money, make some money.
Yeah.
Just like instead of it being like this, it could be like this.
Yeah.
And so if Iowa could get, play in the month of June, and let's say the players get 22 games over 30 days, and you're playing not only Big Ten series, but you're playing maybe midweek multi-game series against regional teams in the Valley or MAC or whatever. On a nice June evening, people will come. People will come, Rob. People will come. They're going to come out for a beer, watch Iowa baseball. They'll do that. So that would be something that I think if baseball could push for is get that extra month. And then on the backside, I'm sure Major League Baseball would love that. That's more development in for teams like, talk about the Southern teams and how good they are. An extra month of development in a pretty good league with a pretty good coaches and stuff that they don't have to pay for. Maybe the draft gets pushed back later. It all kind of ramps up for them in the fall training period. I think that would probably be a win-win, and it would preserve baseball in the North, because otherwise at this current track, Rob, in 10 years, I would bet on not a lot of teams being around anymore in the current area. Maybe there'll be club teams instead.
Yeah, it's just the path to getting to the College World Series from a northern school is just very, very narrow. And that something that they've tried to make, like Scott said, they've tried to push the start date back. They've tried to do what they can, but the southern schools are the power in that sport, and they're just going to, lobby against that, and they've been able to do that successfully so far. So, but we'll see if they want to help the overall product. Maybe they'll relent a little bit and give in where they haven't before. But NIL discussion will take us into our men's basketball discussion here, because that's obviously a big part of that program and what new coach Ben McCollum is trying to thread the needle right now with what he has resource-wise and what he can get. He's been able to land four of his former Drake players. He got Cooper Koch to come back. The roster's starting to take shape now, and obviously Bennett Sturts, the transfer point guard from. The most amazing stat of his, Scott, for me?
What's that?
39.4 minutes per game.
Yes, no question.
That's insane.
Yeah. I mean, he's basically getting about 35 seconds off per game on a regulation game.
And to be that efficient playing that much is pretty special.
The way that they play, and this was so fascinating to just kind of watch at a very 20,000-foot level, is that it's so efficient. And it's worked so well in scoring the basketball and defensively, yet the point guard expends less energy than most other point guards. There's not as much motion in it, but there is some. And it's a different vibe. And it's just amazing to me that somebody like that can, basically play Caitlin Clark minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Bennett Sturts did over at Drake. And obviously the Larry Bird Award winner and just did great work there. And I think if there's anything that this should show people here and maybe everywhere is, his path. I mean, a little over a year ago, he was the point guard at Northwest Missouri State, a Division II school. Yep. Then he took the step up to a mid-major and was the player of the year there. Now he's going to go to the Big Ten, and he's arguably the best or second best player in the portal to sign. And it just shows you that development takes place at different levels, that you can find, just like in football, you can find players that don't necessarily stand out in AAU when they're age 17, but by the time they're 21, 20 years old, and they play within themselves and have this excellent array of work, that they could play anywhere. And Bennett Sturts is certainly proof of that. And it also gives you hope as an Iowa fan where, okay, they brought over 4 guys from Drake. Normally you'd be like, what? Can you imagine Fran doing that? But, but you do have some faith, but it's going to take more than that for Iowa to be a winning program in the Big Ten.
Yeah, no doubt. And if folks missed it, Sturts came out this week and said that he is not going to go through the NBA draft process. He's committed to coming and helping his former coach at 2 different schools, at the 3rd school, and obviously a special relationship there. And for me, Scott, getting somebody like that where he can get more on the open market, but he's doing the guy that got him to this point a solid, which is really cool. I like it. Ben McCollum has to take advantage of that with that player, because this season was going to be a rebuild anyway. But having a player like that, you can market him. Basketball is very good at marketing individual players. I know he's a team guy, but he can still be somewhat the face of the program. Again, he's probably not overly comfortable with that, but it can happen organically too. And maybe you can find some success with guys that know your system, because again, not to keep harping on this point, but comparatively, Iowa just isn't with the big boys in the Big 10 in terms of being able to get guys just with cash. saying, hey, here's a bunch of money, come play, like Michigan's doing right now.
Yeah.
So you have to thread that needle. He has to thread that needle to get this program. He can't, it's not going to come in and just rebuild the roster. You can't do that to a point where you're going to compete for a championship. This thing has to be incrementally developed and built. And having a player like that can help you do that. And I'll be interested to see how he manages all this, because this was the challenge that we kind of talked about from the beginning. But Sturts is a nice piece to that, that not every coach coming into this situation at Iowa would have been able to do.
No. I mean, do you think, I think Nico Medved is a tremendous coach, and I think he's got a chance to do some good things at Minnesota. He wouldn't have been able to bring in Bennett Sturts. Darren DeVries would have brought in Tucker DeVries, which is a good piece, but still, Bennett Sturts is, I'm going to go with what our guys and everybody else has. He's one of the top 2 or 3 best players in the portal, and he's done a great job. And if you believe that, then that is, that's getting now Mark Gronowski could be in that same boat, but he wasn't rated that way, as far as a quarterback in the portal. This is an important foundational piece for Iowa. The others are also foundational pieces. Now, what their degree of, Man Yawu can do, I think he could be a really good player, but to what extent?
Because they're all making a jump up.
Yeah,
right.
Well, exactly, and you can't just expect it to be the same. You can't even expect it to be the same for Bennett Sturts. McCollum said he's the best point guard in America. I'll cut him some slack and say he's maybe got potential to be the second best point guard in the Big Ten. Braden Smith's the best point guard in the country at Purdue, but he's going to be playing against him, so that's a good thing. But I think this is really important, the foundation that gets laid here, what he's able to do in a money ball scenario. But I also think, and this is the product of the environment we're in, Rob, with the transfer portal and NIL and the way that they're able to do things. The high side here is look at a different sport. Look at Kirk Cignetti with Indiana. Horrific program. Historically, the worst program in Big Ten history. Had nothing of value. And what did he do? He brought in a ton, like 12 guys from James Madison, which was very successful, built that foundation with his guys, went to the portal and grabbed a lot of guys that he knew at those Sun Belt schools and a couple MAC schools like Curtis Rourke, who was a quarterback in Ohio, and built it around. And holy cow, did that not work? That worked beautifully for Indiana. They made the playoff. 30 some odd transfer portal guys. Granted, this is basketball and you're going to get 15 guys total, not 30. But this is the same type of scenario where you're looking at is Iowa is at the ground floor right now. And if this, like when Fran walked in, it was at the ground floor. The only one worse that I could remember was Tom Crean walking in Indiana when Kelvin Sampson got fired. That they had one scholarship guy left.
Don't read why Kelvin Sampson got fired, by the way.
Yeah, that now it's like
you'll laugh.
Yeah.
If you're not aware of that out there, listeners.
There's some stuff in the past that when it gets discussed in the future, people are gonna be like, what? Really? Yeah. Yep. Getting a violation for too much spaghetti at a meal, like Oklahoma did. But I do think that provides some sort of a something you can view and say, okay, it worked. It was a different sport, but similar type scenario that you go in the portal, you can get your guys, you can bring your guys to build that foundation. You can sprinkle it in with other players that fit in your area. And they're not necessarily the highest sought after guys either. They're just guys that you think work for it. And if you have, Kirk Cignetti has an incredible ego, good. You need that. And he made it work. And they won 11 games at Indiana. They hadn't won double digits ever, which is amazing that Iowa State and Indiana, neither one of them had won double digits before. They both won 11. But I think overall, that to me is a blueprint that Iowa can follow, because the portal gives you that opportunity that it certainly never did with Fran. It took him 2 good years before he could even get to a competitive level.
Yeah, I think Kirk Cignetti definitely laid the blueprint out there for, everybody in college athletics, how you can rebuild now through the transfer portal. And that's best case scenario, right? He got
Yeah,
best case scenario,
he did.
but it doesn't mean you have to be like college football playoff first year for Iowa basketball or the equivalent of that. You just have to get in there somewhere, where you're not worst case scenario. You have to get for me with Iowa, it's just can you build a little bit of momentum this year? Can Bennett Sturts get asses in the? Are you playing a brand of basketball that gives people hope for the future? And he's bringing in guys he knows that know what he wants. That's helpful, including the star. What can he surround them with what he has? Again, you're talking about, he lost but the Paul point guard had a previous relationship with DeVries, went to Indiana. I kind of get that one, but what else can he get here? What else can he get to put around Sturts next year? And then what can he do next year to then keep moving forward? And that's kind of what you want to look for here as a fan is don't expect miracles. It'd be great if the Kurt Signetti Indiana scenario happens. Don't expect that. Just expect, are we moving in the right direction? Do we see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Of course. And that should be the legitimate expectation. But I think you want to give them the hope that it can happen. Because if you can sell the hope, that sells the seats.
Yes.
And that's what Iowa has to do and that's that by, no fault. I'm not going to get into any kind of Fran disparagement now or whatever, but by the end, people didn't have enough hope that this team was going to go to the tournament and win games and get to the Sweet 16 or even the Final Four. They just didn't have it. That's why they didn't go. That's why they didn't talk about it anymore. I thought that he had some very talented teams. I thought this team had a lot of talent and had some potential, and it could have, would have, should have maybe gotten to the tournament. And who knows? You get a good draw, things can happen. But that said, people didn't believe it anymore. If you can believe it and say, hey, Bennett Sturts is one of the best players in college basketball. He's going to be on the preseason All-American team somewhere on the first 3 teams. That is exceptional. I mean, take away Drake. Just think, one of the best point guards in the country is coming to Iowa. Wow. He's veteran. He understands it. He's won games.
And when you really didn't have the resources to get him otherwise.
Yes. Right.
It's a very unique situation that should be appreciated.
So for me, how you build this, it matters. And I think he's got the foundation. And I really like Cooper Koch too. I think he could be somebody that goes from, lung injury to, starter and a really good starter at that. I look at this as Iowa probably needs to find 2 automatic starters in the portal. Just 2, because if you can line up and you think that Manyawu is going to be your power forward, if you think that Cooper Koch could be your 3, then you need to go get a 2 and a 5, or maybe another 3 or something like that who can come in right away and start and be, impact players. That's going to cost money, no question. But, they're probably having, between $4 and $5 million to spend. And I know they're not spending it all on Sturts and and Cale Combs, he probably, he was very much a small piece of Drake, and you don't want to spend, let's be objective here because we're talking money. You don't want to spend much of anything on somebody like that. You just want them to come in and contribute, maybe help be a borderline scout team member or something like that and improve. But and obviously, and then the announcement just came that Isaiah Howard is officially signed. He committed yesterday. So that's another really good piece, I think, for them.
Let me give you we'll wrap up men's basketball talk here, but the guy Bennett Sturts just statistically last year, 19.2 points.
Yeah.
I'll just do points.
Yeah.
Is it Manyawu? I need to
Manyawu.
7-1, really good rebounder. That rebounding was his thing. 5'3". Isaiah Howard. 4.5.
Yeah.
And then we got Combs at 3.8. And None of those
Tavian
guys.
Tavian Banks is probably going to
Yeah,
come as
he's
well.
another one. It's interesting though, Scott. Banks started one game.
Mhm.
Manyawu was a starter, but Howard and Combs were bench guys.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see kind of what they're again. And again, you mentioned this earlier for something else. Development and growth is not linear. There's no
Yeah.
saying that these guys can't take another step forward next year with another offseason to get better. And that includes Bennett Sturts.
Oh, for sure. He's going to play better competition every game in the Big Ten. When you go to Oregon and Washington, or you got to go to West Lafayette, or you're going to be playing Tucker DeVries over there. You're going to have these games where you're going to play some great players. Michigan comes to town. That's different than going to Indiana State and going to Cedar Falls. And no offense to them, they've got good programs, but and that's the same for everything. But like Tavian Banks, if he makes it, that's 10-1-5.
Yep.
But he was the Valley's sixth man of the year. So he was good enough to start, and then you look at the others. Manyawu was a sophomore. So was Combs. And Isaiah Howard is a freshman, from Plattsburgh, Missouri, which is about 25 miles southwest of St. Joe, where I grew. and this is the small world that we live in, Rob. Bryson Williams, one of the assistants, who is the first guy that he kind of recruited to Northwest Missouri State. He's a St. Joe Lafayette kid. So, they have 5 high schools in St. Joe, and he's the North Sider. That's where Eminem grew up, on the north side of St. Joe before he moved to Detroit. His grandma was the grand marshal one year for the Mardi Gras parade, Eminem's grandma. So north side is really, really blue collar. And that's where Bryson Williams grew up. So I'm anxious to kind of check that out. Lafayette Fighting Irish, the green team. So anyway, I'm
Small world.
Yeah, small world. And I saw Ben McCollum play in college in Northwest. I don't know, man. Worlds are colliding for me. I can't take it anymore.
I think Banks can be one of those guys you talked about, bringing another star. He seems like a guy that could make that transition and just be a starter next year. Or maybe they get somebody else and he likes that role of coming off the bench and is more productive there. It's hard to say. And nothing is right or wrong. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter who starts. It matters who is there in crunch time at the end of the game, or who's even in the middle of the game, who's getting it done. So I wouldn't worry about that. It's just going to be a process here of putting this roster together the best that he can and make this team as competitive as he can in year one, to again show fans, give people hope that the future is bright.
Yeah, you need hope. That's the one thing that sells, and it's change. You need hope and change, and the change worked. To build that up, he and Iowa have done a smart job of keeping him at the forefront. He's done a lot of podcasts. He's done a lot of TV shows. He's done radio shows. He's keeping himself out there to make sure that people are talking about it. And whether it's in the summer, he'll do the same thing. They understand. And that was a point I know Beth made and had to have made to him, which is you just can't fall off the map. And again, not to chide Fran too much. I think I'm turning the page. I think everybody should turn the page, because I think Fran had a really good era. But he had all kinds of opportunities, and people would come, hey, you want to hop on this show or this podcast? He turned them all down. And you got to step up your game a little bit. And that to me is something that McCollum is understands as part of his job and a part of his responsibility. And if he can do that, people will remain interested. And then you start to build with these players coming in, and people will talk about it and get interested and then want to come out and check it out. And they're going to get their ass beat a few times, but everybody does in the Big Ten. And it's just going to be ultimately how they kind of coalesce during the course of the season. And you have again, one of the best point guards in the country. And so that should be a starting point. That's a nice starting point, for sure.
And all of that leads to, not only better attendance, which is needed, but donations, right? You need to we talked about at the top of the show with NIL, the collectives are going to matter, and they matter in men's basketball a lot. And Iowa has to be better there. And this is how you start building that chest. You know, so you have um, a foundation of finances that you know, okay, this is what I need in the portal for next season, and then you can go out and get it. And there's, you know, your coach at Iowa is going to have to be a little bit better at identifying talent than you do at Indiana because you don't have as much money to spend and you can't make as many mistakes. But this seems like a guy that's good at it, like Fran is good at
Yeah.
identifying talent.
Yeah. And, you got to almost work it like Kirk does, because Kirk does the same thing. You're not
Yep.
going to be Ohio State or Michigan in football. You're going to have to go get the 3 stars and build them up and get the Josie Jewels of the world and
Yeah.
all that. I mean, unfortunately, that McCollum's not going to be able to do this with Josh Dix because he just committed to Creighton. So that's a that hurts, but that's not surprising. He's from Council Bluffs, and
That has a lot of money.
yeah, what's that?
Speaking of programs that have a lot of money for men's basketball,
Yeah,
the one in Omaha has a lot of money.
absolutely they do. And now they took, Iowa's 2 stars really in the portal, and in Dix and and Freeman, and that hurts, but he's from Council Bluffs. His mom has cancer. That's completely understandable. It's unfortunate, but it's understandable. And he may have done it anyway, even if Fran was here. But as you said, Rob, when it comes to identifying talent, and I think the important thing here, most of all, is identifying not only just talent, the talent that fits your roster and talent that fits your scheme, your style. And you can do that. Now, this year is going to be kind of shovel in as many guys as you can,
Yes.
and then weed out a few here and there. I mean, the only guy left, I think, on Iowa's roster is the guy who transferred in from Miami.
Let's see. Yeah, from a scholar.
Well,
Carter Kingsbury was on a scholarship last year. I guess the scholarship situations are different now too, with
yeah,
the House settlement. I don't know. Trey Buchanan and then Jacob Cook from West Hire were walk-ons as well, and then Arigu.
yeah. I don't know him, but he was there, but
Yeah, but
that
I'm looking at the roster on HawkeyeSports.com. They've got 8 guys listed, but they don't have Howard on there yet, so that's
yeah,
9.
yeah. So will he keep Carter Kingsbury? I mean, he would be, to me, he might fit in this kind of system a little bit better. I'm not saying he'd play much, but he might be the kind of guy that, hey, he's a holdover, he's a
Bust
bench
his
guy.
ass in practice.
Yeah. And that's a smart thing to do. And then
Legacy recruit.
yeah, and he watched Chris Kingsbury play when he was at Spring Lake, so that's not a bad guy to keep if you have the available roster spots, and you probably do at this point. Bryce Sanford is still in the portal. I know he's likely not to come back, but
Looks like Nebraska, maybe.
yeah, that's what it sounds like. But Nebraska's playing in the Crown, so
And they were second on him.
yeah,
I think had Peyton not been here, maybe Fred gets him.
yeah,
I know Fred recruited him pretty hard, so I get it.
yeah. So that's you do what you do, and maybe make one last run at him with Dix now gone. That, hey, maybe
Yeah,
you can play that role for us. Yeah, overall, it's going to be a challenge. It is, because it's, as you said, it's there's money, there's resources, but then there's also do players like that at that stage of their career want to look at a rebuilding team? And
exactly.
even they could be a part of it and they can grow it, but that's just not the way it works. But yeah, it's a little bit of a bummer this morning for Iowa not to get Josh Dix, because I thought if he and Bennett Sturts could have been together, that's probably that's one of the better backcourts in the country.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. 2-way backcourts too.
Yeah, right.
All right, folks, we've run this thing pretty long here, so let's get a few ads in. Support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That's sui.org. We'll hear from a few more sponsors now, and Scott and I will be back on the other side with more Hawkeye Talk. Hang in there. And we're back on the Hotspot podcast to let you know that switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights. We switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch, but what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch right here in Iowa can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call. When you want the real deal, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Black Angel Restaurant, downtown Iowa City. Perez Brothers owned and operated, formerly of El Banditos and Perez Tacos and the Peaceful Fool and a bunch of other businesses in Iowa City through the years. They do good work. And this is certainly the case with Black Angel Restaurant, live music on the weekends. Go check them out. Good food, good times. Black Angel Restaurant. All right, Scott. Let's dive into a little spring football. We got to see some punting yesterday morning, some stretching, and it's just good to see the guys out there. Just see some football again. And it was cool to see. I was kind of watching Gronowski just to kind of see what he was doing. And I got a photo of it too, of him going through. He had I was watching how it transpired. He had the play sheet, and then he had the plays on his wrist, and he was trying to, I don't know what happened there, but he was looking like comparing the two, and then he went to Tim Lester, and then Tim Lester was explaining it to him. And it's kind of minor thing and things we expect, but it's good to see it happening, right? Because that's what he can't participate physically, but mental reps, super important this time of year.
Yeah, that's exactly what you want. Somebody who's learning, somebody who's trying to absorb it all, and somebody asking questions. Not that, oh, I got it, don't worry about it. He's trying to figure it all out. It's a good thing for him. This is what's funny to me is, Rob, quarterback is the most prominent athlete at the University of Iowa every year, except for maybe the Caitlin Clark's last year. It just, he is. Everybody looks at him, scrutinizes him. He's gone under the radar now, since he came aboard. That's going to switch now in the next couple of weeks. It's going to get back to football talk. How's he doing? How is he progressing? And then people will start talking about it. And then when he gets to start throwing in June, and then there's pictures coming out of that, that's going to be a big deal. Make no mistake. This is an elite. This is a Bennett Sturts. This is a Lucy Olson for the football program. This isn't Cade McNamara. He is one of the best at his position in the country, regardless of division. And being healthy, he can change this offense in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. And I'm not trying to put this way up in the sky and be hyperbolic. I'm just telling you what it is. And that's last year, he played with an injured shoulder all year and still got him to the national semifinals. And he didn't look nearly as good as he did the year before when he won the Walter Payton Award as the player of the year. He had the opportunity to go, Miami was after him multiple times in this portal. And in fact, they won't admit it, but they wanted it over the Georgia quarterback. They wanted him, and they were prepared to pay way more than you'd ever think they would pay. But they didn't. Iowa was able to get him. Iowa had to pay a lot too, but they did it. And he, depending on what happens at receiver, I think if there's enough growth there, this offense will look vastly different than we've seen it in a long, long time. And then, but he's got to grasp it just like everybody else. It's new. The nomenclature, the verbiage is rough when it comes to the Shanahan offense. It's like, I always say, it's like football German. It's long, and it is like 5 words that are one word. And but I think this has a chance to be a really successful year. 1 year, but a really successful one with him.
And this is the best Iowa's quarterback position has looked in quite a while, just in terms of, again, it was a very small sample yesterday that we got, but just watching Brendan Sullivan operate, just the command, the control, you can tell he has a better understanding of what he's doing now, going on a year in his first spring practice with this offense. to have him, and there's no guarantee he doesn't leave. I
Yeah.
mean, we just spent however much time talking about the transfer portal and NIL, and these guys have very small windows to play, and we don't know what if he's going to go, if he's willing to stay at Iowa, knowing he's number 2 going into camp. We'll have to see. But as we sit here today, Scott, that's a hell of a backup, especially when your quarterbacks are hitting the portal left and right.
Yeah. If he stays, that's not just a win, that's a double win. Because you just don't know. I mean, if you remember all the hype with Cade, and then he tears his quad muscle in the open practice, was questionable all the way up until kickoff, and then he was able to play, even though he was questionable the whole camp. And then, but you didn't have really anything behind him, and Deacon Hill was not good enough. We'll just call it what
Super
it is.
nice guy.
Great
Not
guy,
ready.
not capable of leading the team to anything more than just taking snaps. But I think now you're looking at, Brendan Sullivan. If something, God forbid, happened to Mark Gronowski, he could step in and play well. He led them to wins. You look at, the real change in this team, I think last year was, they lost at Michigan State and the offense looked horrible. They were down. He threw the pick 6 against Northwestern, and then, got concussed. And then all of a sudden, Sullivan steps in and they score 40 points. The next game against Wisconsin, they score 42 points. He runs the ball. He does things differently. And it changed the trajectory of the season. Granted, they still lost to, at UCLA, but he got hurt at the end, and he made mistakes. He's not a perfect quarterback. Otherwise he'd be the starter, and then they lost against Missouri, and he was a factor in that. That's why you go and get Mark Gronowski, win those games. So, but that said, if you need him, he's there. You could probably have some packages for him again. And then it's the perfect situation for somebody like Hank Brown. He's now able to absorb this offense in the spring.
Yeah, he's getting number 2 reps now too. So that's really good for him.
Exactly. And granted, I don't want to blow anybody up, watching 15 to 20 minutes of practice and stuff. But hey, that's what we get. So that's what we got to comment on. And everybody will do it at Kids Day as well, or spring practice as well.
I feel confident that Reese Dakin's going to have another good year.
Yeah.
After what I saw yesterday. Him blasting balls off the roof.
One got stuck in the net. It was cool. It was like, and it stayed up there. And I was like, wow, that's cool. I wish I could take a video of that. That would have been great.
Let's have a sunroof for him.
Yeah.
On top of it.
Yeah.
And they just have kids outside catching the balls.
Yeah. It should be like the old Texas Stadium for the Cowboys.
Yeah.
It's like, so God can smile down and watch his team play. More like watching the cheerleaders, I suppose. But anyway, we
were talking about Hank Brown before I got goofy.
All right, Hank Brown. I liked it. I liked what I saw. Little glimpse, just throwing. But I thought, it looked all right, And granted, we're going to get a chance to see more. And I Jimmy Sullivan just briefed too, and so those are things that it's hard to read. But if you're Hank Brown and you're playing behind 2 guys that are way older than you, that are more experienced, that you expect to play, then you absorb it differently, because he knew this going to be the scenario. He was told during the recruiting process that, hey, we're gonna go get another quarterback, and it's probably going to be a starter. But in his case, he's a sophomore, and maybe he gets some cleanup duty in a couple of games, and then he absorbs it, does a good job. Then maybe as a junior, he comes in as a starter. And that's a perfect scenario for Iowa, because as you said, Iowa hasn't had a situation like this that they felt really good about, that paid off for them. Spencer seemed to be that guy. And, Spencer, had an inconsistent career, I think. Fantastic person. And I
think it was part Spencer and part the situation, right? It was the combination of what he was operating in and how he was operating.
Yeah. Like the first year, Now, anyway,
Yeah,
they
we don't. You want to start talking about Rick Rider too? While
no. Let's leave Licklider and let's leave Brian's offense out of this.
yeah, we're trying to feel good about today.
Yeah. I feel good about the offense, Rob. And now my questions are today, even more than at quarterback, is receiver. And I think this is a better unit than it was last year. I think it was better than what it was a couple of years ago for the last 3 to 4 years, probably since the 21 year, which they didn't maximize those receivers. But anyway, I digress. They do have, when you have Sam Phillips and you have Jacob Gill and you have Reese Vanderzee healthy and Seth Anderson's not healthy, so not much has changed there. Caden Weegan, Dayton Howard. There's some guys that, can you take that step forward? Can you go from being, you weren't so bad. You made some good plays. You made some down ones. Can you take that step forward? If they can do that, and if they can find, I'd say this spring, the goal should be find 2 guys that are absolutely going to play for you. Absolutely. Maybe start, but these 2 guys are in the foxhole every single game. Then try to figure out the rest of it during camp. That's what my thought would be there. But I think that's what, if Iowa can get a decent receiving core this year to complement everything else, this offense will be averaging 30+ points a game again.
I think you have a good foundation with Weechin, Gill, and Phillips, but they're all very similar. They're all built similarly, similar games, but can be used in multiple ways too, that you can use them to attack defenses in different ways. I'm with you. I think you really need at least one, if not multiple, of Howard, Bowie, Vanderzee to pop, to take that next step forward. And again, development is not linear. Those guys are certainly capable of doing it. And at least now, unlike recent years when it was just a revolving door, you've had, these guys at least in the program 2 years. And then in Howard and Bowie's case, well, Vanderzee 1 year and those 2 guys 2 years. This is what you want, because you're not going to attract 5-star receivers, 4-star receivers right now, and maybe never. But you've got to build the foundation to show people that, hey, this is a position that we value. Look at these guys that have come through our program. Look at these guys we've developed, and then you make it a healthy position again.
Yeah, because you need that X. And if you want to look at it in today's world, Rob, and this is the reality of it, that Vanderzee, Howard, and Bowie, one of them a year from now will not be there. One of them. Whoever's third out of that won't be there. Maybe whoever's 2 isn't going to be there either. What you want is at least one to establish himself as he's out there 3/4 of the snaps playing X. He's bigger, physical. He can win one-on-one matchups down the field. He can block. You need one of them. And Vanderzee kind of did that, but, he was still a true freshman. And, he wasn't playing baseball because he was hurt, last summer, but he was basically.
And he got banged up during the season.
Yeah, and he was out for half. So you've got that. So you want at least one of them to become a guy. The other one of the other 2 or both of them, there are 3 receiving positions, that they play quite a bit. There's the Z, and then there's the slot, and they've got slot guys. I agree with you there. And KJ Parker kind of fits into that too.
Yeah, true. And he's supposedly he's starting to pop a little bit as well.
Yeah. Great problems to have.
Yeah.
Competition.
Especially compared to what the position was a few years ago.
I know. Remember I think it was the Iowa State game and the South Dakota State game when they played against Gronowski, and then the Iowa State game at home when they were down to 1 scholarship receiver.
Yep.
And it was Arlen Bruce. I mean, God, how do you let it happen like that? But you have these guys now, and now they're competing with one another and each and every day. And so, ultimately at a minimum, you want 3, traditionally you probably want 6 in this offense that you feel like can go out and play a lot of positions. And the good thing with Weegan is he's an All-American kick returner. So he's going to get a lot of snaps there. And and probably play jet sweeping a little bit, and
I'd
a
like to
running.
see more of that from him. I'd like to see them get the ball in his hands a little bit more on offense.
Yeah, I agree. And that's part of the reason why they took Tim Lester off the road, is they wanted him to concentrate on the offense. He wanted to concentrate on building the offense and making it work. And I'm sure looking at everybody's skill set, because last year was drinking from the fire hose for him too.
I'm
Kind
sure.
of.
I'm sure Warren Ruggiero. I mean, you saw him yesterday. He was right in there. So I mean, they've got minds now to, if they can work together, there's a lot of potential.
Yeah. So you've got that, and I really like running back. I mean, it's nobody's Caleb Johnson, just like nobody's Caitlin Clark.
Right.
You establish that, but hell, Lucy Olson was really good too, in a different way. Kamari Moulton is, to me, he's got a chance to be an upper level Big Ten running back, and Jazz Patterson has a really good chance to be a solid number two, and then TJ Washington is going to figure in that too. And this is where, when you get a guy like Lester, he pushes all these buttons. When I talked to Liddell Betts at the combine for a while, he was adamant he thinks Kamari is going to really take off this year. And he's now, they list him at 197. He's over 200 from what he saw. And he came in at like 170. But he's like, he hasn't lost a step. He's more powerful. He runs behind his pads better. I think he's got a chance to be, one of the better handful of running backs in the Big Ten. And if you can do that and still maintain Jazz Patterson and keep, TJ Washington in there, and possibly bring in, who knows? I mean, they got other guys too. This is the healthiest the offense has looked in a long time. And last
you
year,
got what? Xavier Williams and Brevin Dahl were in last
yeah,
year's class,
yeah,
right?
right. And then you've got Nathan McNeil, is it? Look here, but he's
the 25, the incoming kids.
Well, yeah, but he's already there. So
He enrolled already.
Yeah, he enrolled.
Okay.
Yeah, they've got 8 guys who enrolled early, so they're in pretty good shape there.
That's got to be the most they've ever had?
Oh yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. Oh yeah, it's by far the most they've ever.
Because Kirk used to discourage that.
Yeah.
Well, then he realized I can't do that anymore.
Things have changed. You got NIL, you got
yeah,
and if they have that conversation with them, which is, we'd love for you to get, if you're playing basketball or running track, like a Terrence Smith, for instance.
Yeah.
Great basketball player, a tremendous track athlete, and go to your senior prom, go have fun, because once you're in, it's kind of, it's like this everywhere, but at Iowa, it's probably more so. It's like, they shut the door and they throw away the key, and you're in the Army now. And so, go have fun there. But
one more football item here, and then we'll wrap up with some women's basketball, some news there today as well that we'll get to in a second. But the news on the football side is also related to wrestling, and one of the more well-known athletes over there, because he is a really good athlete, is Ben Keeter, the heavyweight wrestler this year for Iowa. Linebacker, we've talked about potentially being a defensive lineman. Neither of those things are going to happen in 2025. We learned yesterday via his mother on social media that he had hip surgery, and something that was bothering him. And that came a week after Kirk Ferentz had kind of said that Ben might want to focus on wrestling. And we've talked this podcast about NIL, roster changes in terms of roster size. It's different now than when Ben committed. So we'll see what happens here. I think his mom said 4 to 6 months in terms of recovery from this injury. So that will put him on track to get back for wrestling, which will be good. And then we'll see. I mean, you don't have to make decisions now. Things change. But it will be hard for him to step away this long from this level of football and be able to come back and find success. You don't want to say never, because he's a really good athlete, but it just makes that much more of a challenge.
It does, and especially what he plays or wants to play, and this is going to be year 2 away, which he could step back in a spring from now. But I think what it does more than anything is it solidifies him as he's got to be a defensive end. I mean, he's got to be, but then that takes incredible technique. at the University of Iowa and the way they play. And that technique is muscle memory. It's not just now, to his credit, he is a world-class wrestler. He, is an All-American. He, was won golds at the highest level.
He started in center field as a freshman baseball player at City High. I mean, he is an unusual athlete.
Exactly. So, for him, and here's the other thing. I mean, rest and recovery is important anyway. Going from wrestling on Saturday to football on Monday is not prescribed. And maybe in high school it is, but at this level it's not. And I think in his case, it's probably for the best. Now, a year from now, maybe he'll be again a little bit more physically mature. It just takes time to build that up. He's still only a redshirt freshman. So, after his sophomore year, and maybe he'll have the opportunity then. He can discuss it more, figure out his weight plan, because I think he does need to bulk up more to be a heavyweight wrestler and be a championship heavyweight wrestler at that level. And if he doesn't play football, he doesn't play football. I mean, the world goes on. It's, and for him, he had that choice to make, and he went with wrestling. And sometimes you have to live with those choices. And, whether it was Connor McKinnon.
Exactly. You're going right where I went with Connor and Brody.
Yeah. They got to make their choices too. And Connor chose basketball, and that's going to be his future as a coach. And Brody wasn't going to go to the league as a receiver. If he was, it was going to be an undrafted free agent type. Well,
or pitcher, switch to tight end.
Yeah. As a pitcher, he's making money. And so that's where you are,
I think it's another example of how hard this is these days. I mean, Bo Jackson Dion ain't walking through that door anytime soon.
Exactly. You just can't, all the sports are so different. I think the only ones that you can do this in, Rob, anymore and have minimal success, if you're counting football, is football, basketball. And you have to be a skill position player because you have that physical gifts. Because baseball has its, the hand-eye coordination that it takes to master seeing a 90-mile-an-hour fastball and how it breaks. You've got to look at that over and over and over and over and over.
See Michael Jordan.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And people don't truly master it. I mean, the best ones in the, you go to the Hall of Fame and you only get hit 3 times out of 10. And I think with baseball to the football, Brody had so much overlap.
Yeah.
He was trying to, just to prepare for it. And he was a pitcher, which I think would be easiest of all, but still it was tough. Because then you're missing spring football. And then, it takes a lot of nuance there because you got to win your route at the top of the route. You've got to learn how to shake and move. And it's tough, Rob, unless you're an elite athlete. And again, I think basketball is the one where if you're a defensive back or a running back or a wide receiver, or maybe even a quarterback, you can make that move, and tight end, I suppose.
And you think about it, all 3 of those guys dealt with injuries. Ben now, Brody in football, Connor missed baseball, and then some of basketball as well early on because of his health. It's just hard physically. The demands of sports, the off-season training, it's year-round. It's just really hard to manage.
Yeah, it is. And so I think in this case, it's probably for the best for him. Maybe later on, and I would never say it's over or anything like that. Maybe you don't
have to decide today. Yeah. Like you said, he's a redshirt freshman.
Right. Maybe he plays 3 more years of wrestles, I should say. Wrestlers don't play.
Do not play. Yeah. Do not ask them to play.
Yeah. Maybe he just finishes out his wrestling career and decides, I'm going to give football a crack here. And then as soon as, and then just wholeheartedly invest for 1 full year in football as a defensive end or something like that. And maybe it works out, but it's not going to be next year.
Yes, we'll see what happens there. Best of luck on recovery for Ben, because he's got a chance to do some big things in wrestling next year too, with some graduations at his weight, which we'll welcome with open arms. Women's basketball, Scott. just, I guess, right before we started recording, it was announced. I'll let you found it, you announce.
Assistant coach Raina Harmon was named head coach at Florida Gulf Coast.
Congratulations to her. She earned
Absolutely.
it.
This is one of those where I think universally the fans that I've seen write about it, whether it's on social media or message boards, have been, kind of a combination of thrilled for her and sad she's going.
I like Liddell, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you really want. You're happy for them to get that opportunity. And Raina's been an outstanding assistant coach and somebody that people have really liked for all these years. But
She's been here what, almost a decade, 8 years, something like that. She's been here a while.
Yeah. And so now she moves on, and you're happy for her and her opportunity because she deserves it. And best of luck in the future for her. But then also, it's a little bit of a hole then for the women's staff that's remained, strongly intact.
Yeah.
That's been the best turnover. I mean, we're seeing the exact opposites in men's basketball. But when Jan Jensen took over for Lisa, they kept everybody, and then they added, Randy Henderson and Sean Sullivan, I think it was, and then didn't have a portal lapse, and then they had one this week now with Aaliyah Guyton and a player that they brought in, Jada Williams, committed to Iowa State. Probably a better move for her and for Iowa that went that way. So they're looking for a point guard to work alongside Addie Deal and Taylor McCabe and
that's important, right? You need a veteran there. That's an important objective this offseason.
Yeah, because Addie is a ball handler, but you don't want to give her that responsibility because she's primarily a scorer.
Yep.
And so think of her as a 2, and you need that 2 guard. Taylor McCabe, how does she fit in? Could she slide over there? Yeah, in a pinch, but I don't think that's her best position. I think shooter is, we want her to be an elite shooter if you can. Kylie Feuerbach is your best on-ball defender and 3-and-D type of player. And you're going to need
Stremlo could probably handle it, but you don't want her to be your full-time point guard.
Right. Not now.
No.
She to me is in that line of Kate Martin and Sydney Falter, kind of jack of all trades guard, and keep her off the ball. I mean, let her bring it up if she needs to and pass and distribute, but also score and defend, all that sort of thing. And then you've got your post, I think, with, of course, Hannah Stolke and Ava Hayden and Layla Hayes, and, how it outlines up. It, again, we'll get hung up on who starts and who doesn't, but that's just honorific. And it's really a matter of, but they do need somebody, in my opinion, that can distribute at a high. It could be a Molly Davis type, or you could get somebody like a Lucy Olson type too, but they do need somebody to fit that role.
I just feel like a more true point guard, that's not that passing is the number one skill and, approach. I think that would work well with somebody like Addie Deal, as you said, who can handle the ball, but really is looking to help you put points on the board.
Yeah. Yeah. Think of her as like a, smaller version of Juju Watkins, Yeah. I mean, this is somebody you want to score, not somebody you want to pass. You want her to pass as much. Caitlin was a rare talent. So there's just,
don't even go there with any extent.
It's off the table.
There's no comp there.
Yeah. But if you can get, Sam Logic is the perfect point guard.
I'll go way back to Kara Consuegra.
Okay.
But and she and Sam Logic were similar. They were pass first point guards.
Right. Yeah. So we're going back before some of them are.
Kathleen Doyle?
Kathleen Doyle, just an intense monster on both ends of the floor. But she was, obviously, if you could get Kathleen Doyle, take that in a heartbeat. But, she was just a monster on both ends and, so intense. But Sam Logic was just that pure distributor, triple, again, pre-Caitlin, but, a triple-double type of player that you could get. And I think if you had her, you'll take that yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
No doubt. So we'll see what the Iowa women are able to do in the portal. The Iowa men are able to do in the portal. Obviously now coaching position to fill on the women's staff. So Jan's got to take care of that. She could move Sullivan up and put somebody in his chair. She can bring somebody else in, maybe with more experience. She's got a lot of options here, but will be big shoes to fill with Raina Harmon. Not only her basketball expertise, but just kind of the energy she brought to the program. So that leaves a void.
Yeah. Tanaya Davis might be somebody to look at. You know, there's a lot of options that she has, and I won't make, you know, I could throw the name out there and speculate, but I'm not going to, you know, push for anybody because, you know, when you have coaches like that, you just figure go get whoever's the best that fits you. And it could be a former player that you feel like does that, or it could just be somebody you want to bring somebody in who maybe thinks differently and maybe can evaluate you differently. You know, but you know, filling Aaliyah Guyton's shoes, it's kind of an unfortunate, maybe best for both parties is kind of how I look at it. That, you know, Aaliyah really would have fit that role. I think another year if she's healthy would have been the best for everybody. I don't know. I think she's going to probably find a really good home, and she's going to be a really good player for a long time. And so I you know, that's unfortunate.
It's too bad it didn't work out, but you know, in this day and age, you kind of just got to move on. Everybody got to move on because it moves fast, right?
Yeah, exactly. So can't get too hung up on who's not here and who what. You know, that there are ones that really wound you, and this one is one that you just go, well, okay, good luck, best of luck. You'll probably see her several times in the future. I think she's that good, and probably, you know, I could see her at like a Indiana or something like that.
Yep, that's where Pops was. So we'll see. Good chance we see her in the Big Ten, but she didn't want to be here, so you fill her scholarship with somebody who does, and you move on. So we'll talk about all this stuff. We've got spring football rolling, a lot of off-season basketball. There is no off-season for anything anymore. So we'll be back here next week to talk about it. I think we have football players again next Thursday. So we'll probably have to push this till Friday, but I'll let you know a little earlier than I did this week. Apologies for that. Again, head cold, not thinking well, and my memory is not good. We get to everything, Scott?
I think so. I think we're all good right now.
All right, man. It was good to talk to you. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the podcast. Thank you so much to our sponsors. And we'll be back next week on the Hotspot to talk Hawkeye sports.